introduce Professor McFarland from the University of California in Santa Barbara with a presentation on natural gas conversion to liquid fuels in a zone reactor.
Let me thank the organizers for organizing this wonderful conference and giving me a chance to speak. Before I talk about the zone reactor per se, I want to talk a little bit about the chemistry that goes on in that zone reactor and compare it to some of the technologies we've heard a lot about here at this meeting. The last speaker beautifully explained why it is that current technologies require a lot of capital. We're going from carbon in its -4, -3 state in fossil fuels, and you need to convert it into syngas, going all the way to carbon +2, carbon +4 oxidation states, and that takes a lot of energy and a lot of money. Plus you need to clean up the gas a fair amount, and that's quite costly, as well as separating out the nitrogen from the air. So there's a lot of expenses associated with the current means of producing the syngas, and then subsequently taking that syngas back from a carbon +2 oxidation state to the desired products, and that costs money and time. If you look at the way people have looked at alkane activation in the past, there's several approaches, and we've heard about primarily thermal activation here to syngas, but also going directly to methanol, which would be the most desirable, has been shown to be the means of preserving the oxidation state of the methane. Using energetic chemical activation to chemical intermediates that aren't so fully oxidized has been used, but predominantly these approaches have had water and acids in the reactant mix, and those have been problematic. In particular, just pointing out with oxychlorination, for example, there was a methyl chloride intermediate with water, and this really, other than the presence of the water, this would be a very nice process, but you had water, you had chlorine, you had HCl, and this gave rise to corrosion problems, similar problems where there was the sulfuric acid approaches. But using strong acid catalysis to prepare a activated intermediate was a logical approach to take. George Olah and his superacid work showed that you could try to fix the acid in another way. For example, antimony pentafluoride was a beautiful electrophile and was a way of activating the methane and possibly eliminating this free acid. And these activated intermediates giving rise to carbocations were the heart of the process, and you never fully oxidize the carbon. And this gave rise to a lot of technology, but the problem was that these superacid catalysts tended to be fairly volatile. So with Olah's process, the intermediate and subsequent transformation gave rise to fluorine loss, or whatever the superacid was, you would lose or tend to lose that functionality. You had to separate the water from the products, and that was also true when Lester took alkyl bromides to olefins. He had the problem of separating the water and the bromides. Jorge Miller did go ahead and introduce a process that also used bromine activation to get to this activated intermediate, but the way that bromine was supplied was through molten salt, and handling that was difficult. And again, you had the water, metal, salt, bromine separation problems, and these were fairly messy. The chemistry that we're interested in is we also use bromine for activation. So we activate the alkane with bromine. That's a fairly straightforward step, and it's energetically basically neutral. The part of our technology that's a little bit different is we introduce a solid oxide reactant, a cataloreactant that takes the bromides, the alkyl bromides, puts the bromine into the solid phase, taking it out of the reaction and giving rise to products. And the first ones we looked at were methanol and DME. Critical was the regeneration of the metal bromide and recovery of all the bromine. And this is why we use bromine, because only the metal bromides give, in the presence of oxygen or air, give back Br2. You can't do that with chlorine. So recovering of chlorine was a lot more difficult, and that's why we selected the bromine. We run these reactions just in straight glass tubes, atmospheric conditions, mild temperatures, with a bromination section, followed by the cataloreactant giving you the products. This is just an example of what you might see with methane. In this particular case, we're looking at methanol and dimethyl ether production. With ethane, there's the similar chemistries are there, but there's a lot more potential products. You can make ethanol, diethyl ether, ethyl acetate, and ethylene, all using the basic same idea, but changing the metal oxide with the reactant conditions. We've set up parallel reactors to look at this so we can run this under otherwise identical conditions, but just changing the metal oxide. So these are all straight tubes with bromination followed by metathesis. And what you'll see, which is really the power of chemistry, is by changing the metal oxides. And these are bar graphs showing the GC integrated products, the green here being ethanol, the yellow being diethyl ether, otherwise identical conditions. If you simply change the composition of the metal oxide in a fairly small way, you get very large differences in the conversion and the product mix, anywhere from almost primarily diethyl ether to something that's more ethanol rich. And this is just a property of the metal oxide chemistry. If you switch to other solids, ones targeted for ethylene, you get nearly 100% ethylene production from methyl bromide. So the olefins are really easy to make. We can also do epoxidation from the dibromides, and we've shown that you can make ethylene oxide, propylene oxide from the dibromo alkyl products. So the paradigm that we've adopted is that you can have a solid reactant that by changing the conditions and the composition of these materials, you can change anywhere from ethylene, to ethanol, ethyl acetate, and multiple others by varying the conditions in the material. We also thought that you could still do the kinds of chemistries people do on zeolites, the aluminosilicates, with methanol. If you simply imagine methanol being an alkyl bromide with a different leaving group. And sure enough, the same kinds of coupling that you can do on aluminosilicates to form ethylene and fuels, you can do with the alkyl bromides. The advantage being that you can get back the bromine and you don't have to make methanol. So the basic schema is to take the methyl bromide reactant intermediate, which is easier to make than methanol, react with the metal oxide, give rise to coupling products, and tie up the bromine in the solid. Like methanol production, you make water. And this is an example of just different metal-doped zeolites. Again, different compositions, different ion exchanges, and you'll get different ratios of propylene and ethylene at different levels of conversion. Some are terrible. Some make all carbon dioxide. Some are better. And we have some reasons to think that we understand that. The analogy is with the methanol to olefins or methanol to gasoline. We think the mechanism is identical, and people have begun to do research to prove that with methyl chloride. And the same kinds of space-time, temperature, and pressure relationships that have been observed for methanol are also observed with the alkyl halides. And we've shown that if you change the space-time, you'll get the increasingly heavy products. This is showing that if you use methyl bromide alone, or if you use methanol plus bromine as the feed, you get a difference in composition, and that's primarily because of the dibromomethane. And I'll come back and tell you why that's important, because it allows you to go to higher conversion if you can use the dibromomethane, which is there's no alcohol analog of that. This is just showing that you get a shift towards the light ends as you take your residence time and go from, say, from 4 minutes down to 1 minute. It behaves exactly in every way that we've looked at, like methanol. You see the same trends with increasing space-time. You get increasingly heavy distributions and more aromatics. And this is the MTG distribution from literature, and we see that we trend towards that MTG product distribution. So, using the same concept of solid reactants, you can tie up halogen. You can avoid many of the problems that have been present with previous halogen-based processes. And as long as you can get all the bromine back, then you've got a process. So I don't want to go through all the chemistries we have identified, but I want to go back to the zone reactant and how it fits in here. If you can imagine taking the traditional chemistries now and making a simpler process where you go rather through a highly oxidated intermediate, but through a partially oxidated intermediate that's relatively easy to interconvert, you could first of all reduce all your cleanup costs, because these solid reactants are true catalysts. They're not poisoned by sulfur. They can handle nitrogen in whatever concentration you care to use it. Of course, it changes the size of the reactors, but you don't have to worry about it being pure oxygen. And then you go directly from the metathesis stage to your products. There's no other intermediate step, so it gives rise to a simpler process. In a conventional configuration, if you look at the yields, we're looking at approximately 8,500 standard cubic feet of methane per barrel of fuel. The oxygen requirements are less, and the CO2 production is less than conventional technologies. When you look at this with an Aspen model, using some kind of Icarus cost estimation on large plants, so 50,000 barrels or so a day. These are numbers from Chem System reports, and these are our numbers, including a 10% return on investment. We're getting down to below $20 a barrel in fairly large scale. And we think we're better in the small scale, and that's where the zone reactor fits in, because this reactor simplifies the process considerably. The way it works is if you imagine a straight tube of a material with corrosion, here's where your metal bromide is, here's where your metal oxide is. You introduce your oxygen at one side, and that oxygen then reactivates the metal bromide to metal oxide, bringing your bromine into the center portion where you introduce the alkane. That reacts in the center of the tube, moving into the metal oxide section, producing products. Those move out of the reactor, and you've converted the metal oxide to metal bromide. And then you just reverse the flow and go the other way, just like a pressure swing or temperature swing system. And the nice thing about this kind of technology is that it limits the bromine to a single tube. You don't have to handle BR2 anywhere, and there's no separation of the bromine from water and the other problems that you've seen with other halogen processes. So the halogen never leaves the reactor. It's a much simpler system, and it's scalable down to, we hope, very small scales. So we've implemented this in a 1 gallon per day scale up. This is the bromination reactor, the top zone where you introduce the alkane. In this case, this is the energy producing metathesis or coupling reactor. This is the regeneration side. It's insulated just because of the heat required for that. And we produce very nice finished product just like you would with methanol. It's basically identical depending on the condition. We get 100% methyl bromide conversion, so you don't see any bromine in the products, and that's a critical part of the process. If you look at other materials, for example, here we were looking particularly to find aromatic species. We wanted to produce aromatics. You can vary the ratio of benzene, which is in the blue, to toluene to xylene, again, depending on which metal oxide you use. These were selected because they produce a lot of benzene, which is a desirable product for one of our partners. Some of our best numbers so far with transition metal exchange DSM-5 showed methane conversions on the order of 50%, carbon utilization of 70%, and BTX is a total fraction of the product of 60%. So these are pretty high yields, depending on what stage we are. The heating in the reactor, the bromination part of the process is really energy neutral. The regeneration can be anywhere from a little bit endothermic to a little bit exothermic, depending on what material you use. And the real heat is produced during coupling, just like with methanol coupling. You have to produce water, so that's going to generate a lot of heat. And this is where you have to worry about reactor design in your configuration. Now, one of the things about this thermodynamic calculation is here we assumed all the dibromomethane went to coke and was eventually burned off. That turns out to not be the case. If you look at the zone reactor as a function of time, this is the metathesis section. This is the regeneration section. As you bring the air into one side, you see the coke burn off early on. So there's a temperature spike where the coke is burning off, and that moves down to the reactor as time progresses. And then you see, also in this particular case, the exothermic production of bromine from cobalt bromide, which was used as the neutralization material. And that is a way of following the reaction to know when you're going to have oxygen breakthrough. The oxygen breaks through during regeneration at a very sharp point, so you don't have to worry about having oxygen and alkane together in the bromination section that might be an explosion problem. It comes off at a very sharp point. The metathesis, remember, is the heat-generating component. And again, you can see the wave of temperature move down the reaction as you move in time, so you can monitor the temperature rise. This is a fairly large diameter reactor, so it wasn't cooled. And so it was basically running adiabatically, and you see a fairly significant temperature increase. The bromination reaction is not, it's just a hollow tube, and you see a uniform temperature distribution across it, and that's expected. Now, the adiabatic reactor is a modification of the zone reactor to give you some cooling, to allow you to use larger diameter tubes. And the way this works is you have the regeneration section, which generates bromine into the bromination section. The metathesis section, which is the one that produces all the heat. This is the part that's difficult to cool. And what you do there is you cool the products, and you can then crash out either the water, bring the water back around, or you can bring some of the light ends, depending on how you want to do the separation. And these being pulled can be brought back into the metathesis section, and you can run this adiabatically, so you don't have to use a tube shell kind of configuration to make this work. Now, the way this might be run in a simplified scheme is you would bring, after regeneration, with following the green lines, you get products, you do a simple separation. You can bring the light ends, which are typically olefinic, back across the same coupling materials. These are just zeolites, so they'll couple the olefins back to heavies. And so your recycle stream will heavy up the product, and you can get that out through separation. And you again reverse the direction, you follow the red lines, and you recycle back to the coupling, so you don't brominate across the olefins. When you scale down to these kinds of facilities at 2,000 barrel per day, of course the cost goes up, but it still looks quite reasonable even at 2,000 barrel per day scale factor. So we're down around $30 a barrel, including a return on investment at these smaller scales. Where we think there's a real possible advantage is to site these on platforms and or other facilities where there's a flare and capture that flare gas, as was mentioned in the last talk. The way to do that is to take advantage of the fact that on high conversion, if you bring bromine through, the conversion of the alkane is determined by how much bromine you bring in. So if you run this at high methane conversion, you're going to have naturally a fair amount of dibromomethane. And if that can be adequately coupled to the coupling section of the product, then you can go to almost 100% single pass conversion, because it's easy to do if you up the bromine content. And then you can just do a single pass, you separate out the oil-soluble products, put that in with the oil, and ship it off to the refinery, and then vent your lights. If you look at the methane conversion as a function, it's fully dependent upon the bromine to methane ratio. Anywhere from at 40% is 2, to 90% conversion is 0.73. And you see how much methyl bromide selectivity goes down quite low. And this worried us because in all of our early models, we assumed that would go to coke. But and again, there's no diol analog in the alcohol case, so we had no experience to know what would happen. On HCSM5, it does all go to coke. When you model the process based on conversion, and you assume that all of that dibromomethane goes to coke, you get an optimal single-pass yield at about 80% conversion. It's because you're going to vent everything that doesn't convert, so you lose that methane anyway. And so on a single-pass flare-type process, you would maximize the process at 80%. It'd be a fairly poor use of your metal oxide because of all the coke that you're generating, and the heat would be fairly large. The real challenge for us going forward was looking at the dibromomethane fate, and we've in fact now shown, this is a reaction over a CSM5 derivatized material, where we show that essentially all of the dibromomethane can go into products with almost no CO2. So we've now shown that nearly all of the dibromomethane can be utilized, and depending on what the metal oxide is that you're using, you can go to either aromatics or in some cases branched olefinic products. So I'll just summarize that I think selective partial oxidation with halogens is a chemically simpler route. It has all the advantages that we've heard previously with methanol, direct methanol synthesis, but the nice thing is that you can actually do it at high conversions. If you use the solid catalytic-reactant concept with bromine, so you can regenerate the bromine back, then you can really avoid all of the practical problems that have been there from previous halogen-based processes. If you use the zone reactor, it limits the quantity of bromine in the reactor system, so you're never handling BR2. And that makes shipping and safety issues much more manageable. This process technology has now been verified by 3 of our industrial partners. They've done this work in their own lab. And finally, we've just recently signed an agreement with Anadarko to put this onto a platform eventually after piloting it next year. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor McFarland. Very interesting presentation. So I assume there is at least 1 or 2 questions.
How much halogen is in the final product?
There needs to be none. Now, how much is there in reality? Depends on what the final metal oxide is. If you use a redox-active material like cobalt bromide, for example, you will generate some BR2 under reaction conditions, and you can brominate the product. We don't. The materials that we use are all non-redox active, so in using a non-redox active metal oxide, we see no detectable bromine in the product. Now, I'm sure when we make higher quantities, it's unlikely that we'll be able to reduce it below a few parts per million, but there's technologies out there from HF alkylation to clean up that last amount of halogen, so we think we can manage that.
One final question?
Could you comment on the size of the reactor foreseen for commercial application? Because you store basically your bromine is fixed.
Right.
Fixed.
The critical parameter for that is the metal oxide oxygen utilization. Assuming that you're going to use a fixed bed, you can do it with a fluidized bed, and then it's not so much. But if you use a fixed bed, you can imagine that the two variables are the oxygen utilization and the cycle time. Cycle time would be about 4 times an hour. And then if you imagine the metal oxide being 100% utilized, which it wouldn't be, but let's just pretend it is, then you would have a reactor volume approximately the size of your hourly output of the plant. So they're going to be big reactors, but they're not, if you compare them to FT, when you take the total reactor volume, it's not more than a factor of 2 different. So it's not so dissimilar. And it also depends on the pressure. I was assuming that we're going to use maybe 10 bar. We haven't yet shown that you can go higher, we don't know if you can go lower, but about 10 bar, it's about a factor of 2 to FT. So they're not enormous, but that's assuming high oxygen utilization of metal oxide, which we have not yet shown. The best metal oxide utilization we've done to date is 60%.
Okay, thank you very much. We need to stay on the schedule, so I believe the others will join us.